you don't want to get any more famous, right? You like where you are. How do you plan on controlling that?
I think doing podcasts like this will probably...
Live from the Willie Nelson and Friends Museum Showcase in Nashville, Tennessee. It's Music is Funny. Musicians talking to comedians about music and comedy. With your hosts, Raelyn Nelson and Jonathan Bright.
I'm still smoking, I'm so high, I keep toking, I'm drunk, but I'm still drinking too.
Welcome back to Music is Funny. I'm Raelyn Nelson.
And I'm Jonathan Bright from the Raelyn Nelson Band, back with another ridiculous and unnecessary intro.
A Greg Fitzsimmons. Greg, what is the first music you remember loving as a kid?
Oh, Elvis Presley. I think Elvis Presley, when I was, my dad is a radio guy. So he had a big radio show in New York my whole life. And so I grew up and they played Elvis, because a lot of the stuff that they played was like Sinatra, a lot of big band stuff. Probably a lot of Willie Nelson. There was a lot of it was AM radio, and it kind of covered the spectrum of different stuff. And so that radio was on all the time. And I, Tony Bennett and big band. Yeah. So I liked big band stuff as a kid.
So was your dad a DJ, or did he work like in the news department? What was his gig?
Yeah, he was a DJ. He was
Okay.
a DJ. Yeah. He was, so I can kind of relate to growing up in a famous family, because in New York, my father was a pretty big celebrity.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting dynamic that we both share, as you sort of it's a nice life in a lot of ways. Like there's a lot of advantages to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also things that are not great about it. Like I always felt like I lived in his shadow a little bit, but I felt like it was worth it.
Yeah.
Right.
When's the first time you remember knowing he was famous? Like you're like, oh, what was that moment like?
We were at Madison Square Garden, and we went to see the Harlem Globetrotters. And I was probably like 6 years old or something. And my father came, and it was his radio station was going to play against the Harlem Globetrotters at Madison Square Garden.
Nice.
And he ran out onto the court, and he had glued a basketball to his hand, and he was waving it around. He was waving it around like this. and I laughed, and people were yelling out Fitz and all this, and I was like, wow, my dad, people know my dad.
And that's a big deal, because you were too young, but in those days, the Globetrotters, that was like almost Elvis coming through, man. They were huge.
Yeah, they were huge in the 70s. They were crazy big. Yeah, Meadowlark Lemon. And
he was my favorite. Him and Cartwheel, yeah, both of those guys.
Yeah. And also New York is it's a town that has its own celebrities, because you've got the Broadway actors that are really big, that, maybe the rest of the country doesn't know as well. And, local radio, obviously. So he was part of that group where we used to go out to the coolest restaurants in New York. Like on Mad Men, they would always talk about oh, we're going to Rattazzi's. Oh, how did you get our table at Rattazzi's? And we went to Rattazzi's all the time. And my father was really close friends with Dick Rattazzi that owned the place. And we ended up buying his house in Florida. And we just we were always going to cool concerts and going out in the city. And it was a blast.
Did you meet any celebrities during that time when he was hanging around?
Yes. He used to be the host of the Jerry Lewis Telethon, because every city has the local host, and then they have the national. So he was the New York host for the Jerry Lewis Telethon. And when I was about 12, I came down, and Brooke Shields, which that Brooke Shields was pretty big in the 70s also.
Smoking.
Yeah, so she came down, and we were the same age, but the difference is at 12, I hadn't hit puberty. I was about 4'11", and she was already about 5'9", 5'10". And so I got this picture taken with me next to Brooke Shields, and I look like I'm standing in front of a firing squad. I'm so scared.
still have the picture?
Oh yeah. I'll send it to you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So you
Elvis.
grew up as a kid on big band. At some point, I would imagine, being a young American male, you branched off from what your parents were into and kind of found like new music when you got to junior high and high school. Did you rebel against some of the big band stuff and go more hardcore? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, I think it was like I was pushed away from it, and then when I got to be older, I rediscovered Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and so Count Basie. But no, in junior high school, we were very into classic rock. The big four British bands: the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Who, and the Stones. And then I got very into Bruce Springsteen. I just he touched my heart. Like, he was like the music that really made me feel something. And my friends didn't like Bruce Springsteen because he wasn't cool. Like, they were all into like harder edge music, and they thought that he was kind of a pussy. And so it was like my guilty pleasure. Like, I would go to bed every night listening to cassette tapes of Bruce, but I wouldn't play it when I was in the car with my friends or anything.
That's right.
Yeah.
He's pretty polarizing there, because we've talked to some of the guys that grew up like Jim Florentine. And if you grew up in Jersey, there was definitely a divide. You either liked Springsteen or you didn't, and you fell into one of the two camps, and you did not cross over. And if you did, you kept it quiet amongst your people.
Yeah. It was like, people saw it as kind of corny. It was like it was anthem rock. It was like kind of Journey and stuff like that. Not that I'd compare him to Journey, but just like they got that kind of play on FM radio. Like, he got too much play, and it was too commercial for them. But they didn't realize, like, he was writing ballads from his heart. Like, even his rock songs were ballads. Like, everything had so much emotion to it, and had so much vulnerability to the lyrics.
Yeah, and just broad production too. When you listen to Born to Run, even now, it's like, wow, they recorded that a long time ago, but it just keeps building and building and building, percussion and all kinds of stuff.
Right, or Jungle Land. I mean, oh my God, that song is like haunting, and what a build. It's incredible.
And he still plays for 4 hours. Now, I'm not really down with watching a 4-hour show. It's too much for me. But the fact that he can play for 4 hours still at his age. Have
you been to a Springsteen concert?
I have not.
I'm telling you, it will keep you going for 4 hours. It's a party.
That's what my buddies have told me this.
Yeah. It's a celebration of life. It's like a really affirming, amazing, especially if it's like an outdoor show in the summer. Forget it. It's just the best.
Sounds like our shows.
And yeah, you said that he talks a lot, right? When we chatted, you said that he talks a lot in between his songs about whatever song he's going to sing.
Oh, right. We were talking about who's the best talker between songs.
I don't know. I'll put David Lee Roth up there with Bruce Springsteen if we're talking about in between songs.
Oh, really?
Just for pure, it's like he's doing bits from the Catskills. It seems like it's like these old Jewish jokes that sometimes he's doing, but just really bad dad jokes.
That's hilarious!
Hilarious David Lee Roth from the 70s and 80s. And Paul Stanley always made me laugh.
Yeah, I was gonna say Paul Stanley
because he sang everything. Like, how you do? Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. And they definitely, when we went to the Kiss show this last time in Nashville, it was like now 4 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And you could tell that they were lip syncing because his in-between stuff that he was singing sounded so different than when they started singing a song.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is nobody in the arena could give a shit.
No,
they were singing along the tracks. They don't care. They just want to see the fire and the explosion.
We talk about Kiss a lot, but the cool thing about Kiss is that Gene has created something that could literally go on forever and ever and ever, because anybody could just take the places of them and put the mask on, play, and lip sync to this exact thing that we heard, you know? It's pretty cool. And people will go.
Yeah, and the music is not real hard to play, is it?
No, and it's not people. I remember I was a huge Kiss fan. I was like 9. It was like my first boy band, I think, if I was a chick, because they had all the merchandise and all that kind of stuff. But I remember, there's blood and fire on all the album covers, but my mom would walk past the room and just listen to it and go, that's Kiss? Sounds like, hyped up 50s music or something. They're really, until a little bit later, there wasn't very ballsy stuff. It was like rock and roll, they just had the fire and stuff.
Right.
My mom.
Well, even
go ahead.
I mean, if you listen to the Ramones, it's like some of their stuff is just like old 50s.
Most of their
rock.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they kind of, that's the story. When they did the Blitzkrieg Bop, they were just trying to do a version of Saturday Night by the Bay City Rollers. That was their thing. They were trying to come up with an anthem. That's where the chant came from. That's where also they were really aping it for their first big hit, which I love. It's one of my favorite bands in the world.
Actually, now that you say that, I have to admit in full disclosure that my first concert was the Bay City Rollers.
Dude, do you remember the Saturday morning their Saturday morning show on TV?
Yeah.
I used to just look at that and look at the drums and everything. I want to do that.
Yeah. I went because I was probably in like 7th grade, and all the girls loved the Bay City Rollers, and they were going down to the Palladium to see the show. And so me and my friend Josh were like, man, if we go see the Bay City Rollers, and then we'll meet all the girls. And so we brought, and you bring a plaid scarf, and you wave the plaid scarf.
I don't know what this is. What is this?
Well, they wore plaid pants and like knickers and stuff.
They're from
Are you allowed to say
Scotland.
that?
Necros.
Are we canceled?
Yeah, I think they're called Necros now. But the plaid, just really almost glammy, done up. They had like the shag haircuts and stuff.
Okay.
So they had a
so
whole-
you would do scarves and plaid?
Plaid was their thing.
Okay, got it.
They were from Scotland.
There it is. And it's like Cheap Trick's checkered.
Yeah.
Kind of that.
Got it. So what kind of music do you listen to now when you're in your car or in your studio? Just because you don't listen to podcasts, right? You just listen to
Bay
music.
City Rollers.
I listen to music. I listen to you guys lately. I'm really enjoying you guys a lot.
Aw,
Oh,
thanks.
thanks. I wrote all those.
And I guess like Chris Stapleton, I've been listening to a bit of. I like I really do listen to older music a lot. Like I like the Pretenders. I still think I think Christy Heinz is the greatest rock front woman of all time. She's incredible.
Yeah, and James Honeyman Scott, R.I.P., was one of the greatest guitar players.
Oh, you love him.
Melodic guitar players ever. Every musician that's heard him loves that dude.
Yeah. It was an incredible band. I don't know who played the bass, but a great bass player. And now she got really lucky because, she didn't have a big background in music. She went over to London when she was like, just kind of like a burnout. Mm-hmm. And she was working in a clothing store. And that guy, the guy who produced the Pretenders and he produced the Sex Pistols, what's his name?
Malcolm McLaren.
Yeah, Malcolm McLaren met her. She was working in in his clothing store. She was just making minimum wage. She hadn't sung in a band. She barely played guitar. And then she started getting into music and playing out. And then she played with a couple little bands. And then he said, I think there's something here. And he assembled that band. He assembled the Pretenders. And he put together some great players.
Yeah, he got lucky. He nailed that one. And I think she was maybe 30 years old or something when she actually started playing. She wasn't really young when she started.
Yeah.
Right.
She's cool. We did a Pretenders tribute show last November. And I really dug into all the documentaries I could find about the Pretenders and everything I could find out about her. And it's like the way she wrote songs is so strange. It's like it's a different way of writing songs.
You mean her process or her songs?
Oh, the actual song. The actual song is so.
The words are weird.
The words are weird. The melody's weird, but it works. It was
her first album. I think it's the first track on the first album. Is it Precious? And in the middle of the song, she just goes, "Oh, fuck off."
Yeah.
Yes, that was one of the ones we covered for the tribute.
Mm-hmm.
Really? I mean, it's just such a statement. It's so raw. Like, here's this woman out of nowhere. It's her first shot, and she's coming out and going, "Fuck off."
Not me, baby. I'm too precious. I had to fuck off. And then we did it somewhere, some festival, and some guy came up afterwards, and he told me 3 different ways of how she would turn around and grab her ass when she would go, fuck off, you know,
Oh,
and he
really?
saw her at some point. Yeah, he was pretty drunk. He told me 3 times, but I thought that was pretty cool. She is cool. Christy Heinz is the best. Yeah, she's cool.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
Joan Jett too. It's like,
I know you love Joan.
yeah, they were close though, right? They were friends.
the rock chicks, you know, the legit ones sort of formed a bond coming through.
We don't
Everybody
do that
loves
anymore.
Joan Jett. I mean, she was 15 when she was doing that.
Yeah, she was tiny.
Pat Benatar was a badass.
Yes, she was.
Mm-hmm.
She could sing her ass off. I had
Yeah.
a friend that was doing one of her records, producing it, and she had a family at the time, and it was back in analog tape. And she went in and did a take. I can't remember which song he was doing, but something happened with the tape, and he was like, and it didn't get recorded. And she wasn't much of a 2-take person, but the line she came in, she looked at him and she's like, I've got a fucking PTA meeting in 30 minutes. You better get it right now. And he's like sweating when she's, wah, and then got done, went to get her kid or whatever. Yeah.
A PTA meeting.
Yeah,
That's
great
cute.
story. Comedy. How did you get into comedy? Was it something as a kid you liked,
Well,
or
did you ever think of writing songs, or did you ever think about joining a band or playing music at all, or did you just
I was
immediately
in
go to
a
comedy?
band when I was in like 7th through 9th grade. I played in a band, and I played bass, and which basically meant my friend Norman was like an incredible guitarist. I mean, he was already like studying music theory by 7th grade, and he was he had a Fender, and he was great. And so he basically just took one of his old guitars, his electric guitars, and we just cranked it down and made it a bass. And he taught me some really simple bass lines. And then my brother played drums, and our other friend Ricky played guitar and sang. And but we used to play parties all the time, and we just played we played a lot of Zeppelin and the Stones, and then we wrote originals.
Okay.
Because in 8th grade we were already taking mescaline, so one of our songs was called the M Escalator.
wait? We got to know what the band name was.
Yeah, what's the band name?
Eli,
Eli?
Eligh. No idea why. I
Okay.
don't know why.
It sounds like your first band name, The Norm.
Well, we named that after my dad because his name was Norman.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I think Dane Cook's was a Vivid Blur.
Vivid Blur. Yeah, that was Dane Cook's band.
Oh.
So, did you write some of these original songs too?
Yeah, we wrote them together, and some of them were, we had songs about, we had a teacher named Dewey Ekdahl, and so we had a song called Dewey, and it was a calypso song. Once there was a man named Dewey. He rode his boat out past the buoy. Dewey.
I was waiting for the rhyme for Dewey. What's this going to be? Wow.
Buoy.
So have you guys thought about reuniting? I mean, that's a big thing in the music business. You should get back together for.
Well, Norm is a very successful guitarist now. He plays. He's a session player, and then he goes out. He's got a band, and they play. I think it's just Allman Brothers. They play.
Oh.
He must be a good guitar player then.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's great. But I don't know about my brother. I don't know if we can get him in the band at this point.
Well, you said he was the drummer, right?
Yeah, I think
We have trouble keeping a drummer, so if he wants to learn our
Are they
song.
famously the most difficult? Yeah.
Yeah, we've had 13, 14 drummers now.
Probably, yeah, throughout the course. And they have all lived. It's not like Spinal Tap, but
They just get better gigs. Like
Really?
we lost one to Gene Simmons. We lost one to Steve Earle. We lost one to Steven Tyler when he did his country band.
Yeah.
yeah. So if anybody's listening and wants to get a really good gig playing drums, do some shows with us and boom, you're on your way.
Yeah,
Launching pad for drummers.
what we
Sure.
do. It's what we do. Okay, yeah. So why did you decide to do comedy? When did you just go to a open mic and try it? Did you Because
Well, I was like, I think because my dad was in show business, and he used to MC dinners. He'd put on his tuxedo, and he would go every year he went to this high school in the Bronx called All Hallows, and he would do a benefit there every year, and I would always go with him, and he would tell jokes, and a lot of his jokes were just making fun of the priests, which was hilarious because nobody would talk to the priests, and I think I just got it in my head wow, that's a cool thing to do. And I was obsessed with comedy. So I had every comedy album that had ever come out. I still have this huge comedy record collection. And I memorized all the albums, and I used to watch The Tonight Show every night, watch Carson. And then when I was in high school, there was a talent show senior year. And so I signed up, and my friend Frank signed up as well. Frank Moretti, who was like, you know, me and him were like the class clowns in high school. And so we did like a gram of blow and some tequila. And then we went in, and he chickened out. And I did it, and I was doing jokes about Mr. Koskoris was the Western Civ teacher, and he was sleeping with the art teacher, and it was like the worst kept secret in school. Like everybody kind of knew about it, but it was not known. So I just started doing jokes about that, and so they unplugged my mic backstage, and so I just put the mic to the side, and I just yelled out the rest of my act a cappella, and it was, I remember I walked off stage, and I walked out the stage door to the outside, and I remember jumping up and down. Like I had never felt a rush, anything like that in my life. Because like all my whole teenage years, I spent at the Comedy Cellar in the Village and the Improv, and I used to go to these clubs, and I'd watch Seinfeld and Paul Reiser and Richard Belzer, and it's like I dreamed of doing this, and I had done it, and it went well, and plus I had a little coke in my system, and and I just remember like feeling like, wow, there's nothing could ever feel this good, and I was kind of like, that was it.
Were there any repercussions from the school other than just getting your mic unplugged?
No, it was the end of the school year. It was the end of the year, senior year.
Well played.
Yeah, right.
So.
Right.
I'm sure you didn't go right from there to getting in comedy. Didn't you like start in Boston? Like when you first started doing comedy?
I took a year off after high school, and I backpacked around Europe for like 6 months.
Wow.
And I wasn't going to go to college because I did really badly in high school. And then I decided to go to college, and my freshman year, just coincidentally, there was a comedy club. If I looked out my dorm room window, I could see the back of Stitch's Comedy Club. And so I used to go to shows there, and then I signed up. So it was January 6th, 1986. I signed up, which was the day that the New England Patriots lost to the Chicago Bears in the Super Bowl. Like one of the biggest losses in history. You remember that?
Oh, they lost badly. 55-0 or so. I mean, it was brutal. And
it was the refrigerator Perry playing for Chicago.
And I do remember they didn't give Walter Payton the ball to score at all during that game. They were running the fridge in the whole time. Like, you're scoring all these touchdowns. Get the Hall of Famer a touch. But anyway.
Right. So that night was the first night I ever did it in a comedy club. And I had a bunch of my friends show up, and it went really well. And so then throughout college, I would do stand-up at open mic nights, and I'd go to comedy show. Like they would have comedy shows on campus sometimes, and then I joined an improv group for a couple years, and so that's how I got started.
Well, and I think we were talking to Nick DiPaolo about this, but it seems like if you're getting your start in Boston, it's a pretty brutal. The comedians, everybody, it's like you can't mess around there. And I would think it would sort of prepare you for moving out of Boston and going to doing comedy elsewhere, because you've kind of been through the gauntlet there. Very much so. Like Boston had a really alive, like what Austin or Nashville is to music, like Boston was to comedy back then. And it was like, there was probably about 6 full-time clubs downtown, like 7 nights a week. And then there was all these little rooms. Comedy was so big at the time that there was a comedy boom happening. And so every pizza place, Chinese restaurant, anywhere that had like a banquet room, they stuck a microphone in it. They put a sign out front that said comedy on Tuesday nights, and they would sell it out. So like 7 nights a week, you could do it. All you needed was a car and, 15 minutes of material, and you could go out and make $50. And so by the time I graduated from college, I was already making a living as a comedian. Wow. And so, but it was like tough rooms. I mean, Boston crowds are notoriously confrontational.
and the other comedians are like hard edge, like they really come at you. And so if you can't hang with that, it's very hard to make it in the Boston comedy scene. You have to be pretty aggressive. And so then when I came to New York, I was like, they kind of, there was a well-worn path to New York from Boston, because guys that came ahead of me, like Louis C.K. and Nick DiPaolo and a couple other guys, they kind of like broke down the doors in New York, and then they brought us in.
Yeah.
And then we would bring in the next guys. Like Louis brought me in, and then I brought in Bill Burr, I brought in Patrice ONeill, and those guys all stayed at my apartment when I was living down in Little Italy. And but it was always a good fit. Like the club owners were always excited to see a guy from Boston. And when I say a guy, there were very, very few female comics in Boston.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And it seems like that, like what you're describing, once you got Bill Burr in there, that whole New York comedy scene, like during the Tough Crowd era and all that, that was one of my favorite collections of comedy. Just the whole Tough Crowd show was great. And I send her clips all the time. I'm like, this is what they used to be able to say on Comedy Central. Can you believe this? Like, how much fun was it doing comedy in New York during that period?
Yeah, Tough Crowd was always a blast, because they were really good at putting the panels together too. They would put people together that would, some people from the left, some people from the right, black, white, women, gay men. It was always like it was built for conflict. And that was the spirit that everybody went into it, is like, we're going to bust each other's balls and we're going to push it really far. And Colin was such a good host because he could roll with anything. He would never get shaken. The only time I saw him get shaken up was when Greg Giraldo and Dennis Leary went on. Did you ever see that clip?
That was one of my favorite. We talked to DiPaolo about that, and he was mad he wasn't on. He goes, I couldn't take my eyes off it. I was loving it. And the same way, you could just see the just anger, just seething looks shooting across each other.
Oh yeah, I mean, Dennis Leary was ready to throw hands, and I'm actually surprised he didn't go after him physically. And the thing is, Giraldo didn't start it. Dennis started it, and all Giraldo did was, step up and go, no, you're not going to push me around. I'm going to push back. But Dennis wasn't used to that.
Yeah, and especially with somebody like Giraldo had a quick wit. He was one of the killers on there, and that would be one you wouldn't want to really step into the ring with unless you were ready to go.
Yeah, I think there was a fair amount of guys in Boston that didn't respect Leary. He was like, I don't know. I don't want to get into it, but like it was a pre-existing thing.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to set you up for this story because we talked about it the other day, but have you ever been performing and an audience member attacks you or throws something at you while you're performing?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it happened at Stitches, the club that I did my first ever set at. And it was, it is really crazy what's going on now with like people attacking comedians. Like, like when it first happened, a few people said, what Will Smith did is going to create an environment where people think it's okay to do this. And now you're seeing, like with Chappelle, that crazy guy, like it's once crazy people get an image like that in their head, then it's almost like they have to do it now,
Yeah.
But when it happened to me, it was, I was on stage and it was a Jewish comedy night. It was like a mixer for young college kids to meet each other. And so this guy shows up, and he was a cab driver, and he was from Israel, and his name was Simcha. And he sat in the front row, and I guess he had tried to talk to some of the Jewish girls there, because he was thinking like, oh, they will love me. I am a real Jew. And it's like, what he didn't realize is like, these were like rich BU girls that wanted to meet, rich Harvard students and get married. They don't want to meet a cab driver. And so he got kind of scorned. And so he started taking it out on me, and he started heckling me from the front row. He's sitting alone at a table in the front row, and he keeps coming at me. And eventually I just go, I said something to him. I kept shitting on him. And then eventually he goes, nothing more. And so I said, all right, let me know when your friends get here. And so he comes up on stage with his fist clenched, and he comes at me, and I take the microphone, and I've got like a good 1980s microphone with like a big mesh. It's like a Game of Thrones weapon. And I crack him across the forehead with it. And he's bleeding, and he gets me in a headlock, and he's doing some Krav Maga shit on me. He's me around the stage. Tables are getting knocked over. People are screaming. And the bouncers are nowhere to be found. They're out back smoking a joint. And so eventually, like, my friends were there, and they came up and they pulled the guy off of me, and the show stops, and my neck is like twisted. And then the club owner comes over, and they like set up the front row again. They buy everybody drinks. And then the club owner comes over to me. He goes, all right, Fitzsimmons, you got 5 minutes left. And they send me back on stage again.
How'd you do in the last 5 minutes?
I walk on, I got a standing ovation because it's Boston, and they'd rather see a fight than a comedy show any night.
Oh, nice.
And so they finally calmed down, and then I looked out at the crowd and I go, all right, who's next?
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, there were some comics in the Boston scene that nobody would jump on. It seems like there were giant men doing comedy back there in Boston, like Lenny Clark, and all these guys seemed just like giant behemoths of men.
Yeah, there was big dudes. It was Lenny Clark and Steve Sweeney and Nick DiPaolo. I remember he cold cocked a guy. He called some woman a cunt, and the boyfriend got up on stage and came at him. And before he could get fully on stage, Nick just cold cocked the guy. And I think there was a big lawsuit over it. But hey, you come on stage, guy's got to defend himself.
Yeah.
And Nick was a big dude too.
Nick played football for Maine.
Yeah.
Okay, and we recently talked about this too, how you don't want to get any more famous, right? You like where you are. How do you plan on controlling that?
I think doing podcasts like this will probably
You have to get started.
I want to keep my profile really low.
For sure.
Totally. But we talked about how, even as a musician or a comedian, if you have 1,000 true fans,
Yeah.
right, that will buy anything.
Everything you do.
Everything, anything, you can be successful and not have super fame, which is what I associate success with because of my grandpa, and maybe you because of your dad, uber fame, But yeah, I just think it's interesting, and I heard you talk about it on your podcast too, how you're like, I'm done. I want right here. I don't want to go anymore. I don't want any more followers. This is where I want. But I don't know how you stop that, other than by doing shitty podcasts like this.
How did you arrive at that? Because I'm sure as a youngster, you're trying to get as big as you can.
I think it was just when I had kids, and I was like, the first year of my son's life, I was on the road, and I freaked out. Once he was born, I was like, I got to make a lot of money. I got to save for college. I need health insurance, and so my wife was a stay-at-home mom for like 18 years, and so I put a lot of pressure on myself to take care of the family. So for the first year, I was like, gone almost every weekend. And she was really struggling. And so I talked to Louis C.K., who was working on Cedric the Entertainer Presents, was his sketch show on Fox. And I said, man, you got to get me a job. You got to get me a writing job. So he talked to Cedric, and he set up a meeting for that Monday. He said, come in and talk to Cedric. They need somebody to write monologues with him. And we clicked, and I got the writing job. And I kind of made a decision at that point that I was going to split my time between writing and stand-up, and that would kind of give me the balance where I'd be home more. I'd get my health insurance. Writing is really good money, and I'd be able to still do stand-up a fair amount, but not have to do it as much. So I think I kind of chose my family over my career, and now that my kids have moved out of the house, I think I could put more time into it than I was before.
Now, when you've done a lot of writing over your career, I always wonder if when you do both of those things, if when you're heavily into the writing, you're like, man, I really just want to go do stand-up. And then when you're doing all the stand-up, you're like, man, I just want to go back and do writing.
Yeah, for sure. But the nice thing about writing is like you show up every day and you see coworkers and you got your coffee cup on your desk that you use every day, and like there's some familiarity and there's some routine. And you guys know what it's like on the road. It's like you're starting over every time. You go to the club and there's new people to meet, new manager, new waitresses to take care of you in the green room. Like it's all a new relationship.
Mhm.
And I've always loved the routine of a writing job. So I don't get too sick of it.
And a steady paycheck too, I would imagine.
Steady paycheck is nice. And with writing jobs, you get residuals. So you don't just get paid that week, but every time it airs, you get paid again.
That mailbox money.
Yeah, right.
So how did you, I'm also curious, is a lot of you guys, a lot of us saw your faces first, or a lot, on all those VH1 shows you did back in the day.
Right.
When you
Yeah.
got on those, did you feel a significant bump in your career? Because it seemed like you guys were on, your face was on, because they replayed that shit 100 times a day.
Yeah, the VH1 thing was really good for me. I did the I love the 80s, I love the 70s, I love the 90s, and then I was on Best Week Ever every week for like 5 or 6 years. And it was really good because they put your name in front of your face, which is really cool of them. It was like a commercial for you every time you spoke. And then we would do a tour where I'd go on stage with like Patton Oswalt and Doug Benson, and we'd go and we'd travel around and we'd do mostly college shows, and we'd get big crowds. So yeah, that was a good run. And that's something people remember. People come up to me all the time and like, I remember you from VH1.
Yeah, because that was massive exposure in pre-internet days.
Yeah, right.
And did you sit down and did you film a bunch? Did you film every week? Did you sit down by yourself with a team of writers? How did that work?
We did it every week. No, they had writers, but I didn't use them. So they would just they would email you a topic, all the topics,
Right.
usually like the night before. And then that night you would just sit there and try to write jokes. And then you'd go in the morning and you'd have like an hour. And it was just a camera on you, and they'd throw you a topic and you just riff on it. I would just drink a lot of coffee, take an Adderall, and just like go crazy. And then they'd cut it up.
I was thinking when you were talking about all those dudes moving from Boston to New York and staying with you, what must it have been like to live in that apartment when these guys were just going in there and crashing? You got to have some stories about that.
Well, I remember the first time Patrice ONeill came down. I should say the only time is that Patrice came down, and I lived on a 6th floor walk up in Little Italy on Mulberry Street. And so Patrice shows up, and he weighs about 350 pounds, and he's got a big duffel bag. And my apartment, the intercom didn't work, so he would have to call my home phone, and then I had a sock with keys in it that I would throw out the window down to the street. And then he hikes it up 6 flights, and the building is all old Italian ladies from, they grew up, they were babies, they were born in this building. It's like real Italians, and they all keep their doors open, so that every time you walk upstairs, you got to say, hey, Tony girl, hey, Vinny, hey, whatever. And they give you food. They always cook too much because their kids have moved out, and they still make like a big pot of pasta. But Patrice walks in, and let's just say black people weren't huge fans of black people. And so
like you, Raelyn. I'm just kidding.
So he just got dirty look after dirty look all the way upstairs, and then he gets into my apartment, and I've got this shitty old couch that folds out that sags like this. So he spends the night, and then the next morning I was like, all right, let's go get some breakfast. And we're walking out the door, and he's got his duffel bag, and I go, why are you bringing your duffel bag? He goes, you think I'm walking up those fucking racist steps again? I'm out of here. And he drove back to Boston.
Racist steps.
He was one of my favorites, after his passing, it's funny listening to everybody talk about how much they loved Patrice, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that didn't love Patrice, or maybe in retrospect, it had to be.
He was really mean. He was beyond roasting. He would go past your shirt, past your eye color, past your personality, and he'd go for your soul. He he would destroy people. He looked through you and he saw things that you didn't want anyone else to see. He was like, it was a sick gift that he had. And I remember Lisa Lampanelli, like, don't ever bring Patrice ONeill up to Lisa Lampanelli. She fucking hates him. Yeah.
So did they go at it, I guess, back in the day? I can imagine.
I think she came into the Comedy Cellar and he did what he does. He just kind of roasted her and she felt uncomfortable being there. And, she's like used to being the person that's doing the roasting. And so she never came back.
God, I can't imagine. And that legendary table everybody talks about when you walk down in there and the wolves are just waiting and you just were trying to get it off of you onto somebody else as quickly as possible.
Right.
A table full of some of the greatest smartasses.
It's so much fun to watch too.
Yes. And I think that's why Tough Crowd was so successful, because that was the vibe on the show. It's a bunch of guys sitting around. And,
well, it was the same guys. Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah. Tough Crowd was Geraldo and DePaulo and Jim Norton and Bobby Kelly and all the people that sat at that table every night, because you try to you do spots in New York, you'd run around and you do spots at different clubs, but then you'd always end up at the Cellar because they had the Olive Tree Cafe upstairs with that table and they had good food and they fed you for free if you were a comic. And so we all ended up there every night.
What a nice life. Did they allow Colin to handpick all of you guys, or did he get to pick everybody that came on the show basically that he wanted to?
Yeah, I think he picked everybody.
Because he was clearly good at cultivating, or he had some kind of overall view of all of you guys. It was like, if I put here, I'll just kick back and watch and just interject here and there.
Right. And he did me a solid one time because he had heard a rumor that I had a big penis. And because I'd slept with a couple of female comics. And they had talked about it, and he heard the rumor. And so then we were in the green room with all the other acts and his assistant, and he goes, "All right, Fitzsimmons, I heard you got a big cock. Let's see it." So I unzipped my pants and I whipped it out, which is how you describe it when it's big. You whip it out. And he saw it and he goes, "All right." And his assistant goes, "Wow." And so then we went on the show that night and he talked about it for like 5 minutes. And so it went from a rumor among comedians to a well-known fact all across the country. And I have to always thank him for that.
I do think I remember that episode too. Yeah. That was the best part about that show, is you could come on and it would get, they had topics, but every now and then, or a lot, it would go way off the topic because people sitting around that can throw zingers out and just jumping on each other. And it seemed like that show was the same way. If somebody had it on them, they were just trying to get it off on somebody else.
Yeah. It was a wrestling match. And, and I don't know why Comedy Central didn't keep it on, because it's the kind of like for a network like Comedy Central, the best thing they can do is get a lot of talent on the air, to take people. They're trying to form relationships with comedians so that they do their specials on Comedy Central and they'll host shows when they get bigger. And it was a great way for them to be able to cycle through new comedians every night. And I don't know, I thought it was a huge mistake when they canceled that show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it seemed like it got canceled before the idea of canceling people was around. Like it seemed to be premature. Nowadays, you could see why they would pull it off, but back then it didn't seem like what? It's just not on. It's like they didn't want to pay for it or something. I don't know. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, right. How much equipment do you guys travel with?
All of it, all the musical equipment you can think of: drums, bass,
everything
amps,
but PA. But not when we go to the West Coast. We end up renting guitar amps and just taking our guitars on the plane.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't carry all that stuff.
Yeah.
But enough about us.
No, but I think about like stand-up versus being in a band. Like we literally don't bring anything, and we're just
so jealous.
And the only equipment is a microphone, and it's already there. It's so easy, and then we don't have to split the money.
Yeah, you don't have to pay anyone.
Now the advantage we have is if we start bombing, we have a whole team up there to bomb with us, and we can turn up louder or whatever and just drown out anything. You guys have to sit there and eat it.
Right. And then also after the show, you guys get to all hang out, go to a restaurant together, party, whatever.
Yeah, that's
sometimes.
that's when
Usually everything's closed, so we're like, oh my god, we forgot to find food for us at night. It's
right.
usually a pain in the ass. You know how the road is. Everything closes early.
Yeah.
and then
I
you
know.
know on show 3 or 4, you've hung out with each other a whole lot anyway. So dinner time, maybe everybody just splits off and does their own thing.
Yeah.
So it's like you traveling with 3 openers in a van, and eventually you're gonna probably split apart from the openers to get a little fresh air.
Little space.
Right.
When's the first time you remember hearing about my grandpa? Do you have your own personal Papa Willie story that you can share? Or
I think it was when he sang with Julio Iglesias, For All the Girls I've Loved Before.
yeah,
When I saw it on The Tonight Show. And I was just, who couldn't fall in love with that? That was just the coolest thing in the world. And then, I've always listened to all this. So my father was a big fan. And so he played him a lot on his show. But that duet was incredible. What year was that? Do you know?
oh, I don't
can't
know.
remember. It's funny
80,
it's funny when he says, "Who couldn't fall in love with that?" I can tell you who. Doug Stanhope. Because we asked him the same question, and he's like, "Well, my first memory I think of," and he mentioned that song. He's like, "What a fucking horrible song!" It went on a 5-minute rant about how terrible it was. It was hilarious.
And he was like, you didn't ask me my most memorable time.
what
You
the
asked
nice-
the first time, and that was the first time, and it was horrible.
Brought me up in this triggering memory of your grandpa.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's funny.
We should also mention before we get out your podcast. Like, you've been doing that for a while too. Does that scratch an itch that's somewhere in between writing and stand up?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to describe it. I think it's like it's a way for me to. One of the best parts is I get to sit down for an hour with good friends that I wouldn't normally see. People like Dave Koechner or Neil Brennan, or people that I bump into, but I never get to sit and like chill with. And then or Raelyn coming on and meeting somebody new who's fun. So
you don't have to say that just because.
No, she knows we had a connection. I think
she did say it was fun. She did say it was fun.
Yeah. And so it's like, so that part's fun. And then it's also like after I do the interview, I do like a 20-minute intro, which I'll sort of think of some ideas that I want to talk about. And then that can become the germ for something that turns into stand-up later.
Yeah.
So that's productive. And it's just a good way to plug my tour dates and, whatever else is going on. So it's been like 13 years. I'm coming up on my 1,000th episode pretty soon.
Wow.
Time. Yeah, you've been doing. You prefer that to when you were on Sirius, like doing straight radio?
I like that too, because with that you got phone calls. People called in, and also they had a whole team of producers. It was so easy to just show up in the studio and everything was taken care of. But no, this is good. And then I do 3 podcasts now. One of them, you can see this Sunday Papers logo behind me, is the one I do on Sunday with my best friend from college, Mike Gibbons, who's a big, he creates a lot of comedy shows.
I like that one.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And it's really fun. It's a lot of work because we have to like pull news stories that we're going to talk about. And then we usually write jokes about them. And there's a lot of busy work with that one. And then I do another one called Childish, which is super easy, with my friend Allison Rosen. And she's got babies and I've got teenagers, and so I try to teach her how to parent, but she's not really buying it.
That's good.
Yeah, so that one's pretty easy.
And then your main one, Fitzdog.
Yeah, and then the Fitzdog Radio one is just a straight interview, just a hang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll put all those links in the description here so everyone can go there. All 20.
Nice.
We'll keep you. Yeah, not too much attention. We don't want you to get too.
No, we
famous,
won't.
but,
Yeah, we won't put it up too much.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Small print, like an 8 font.
Right.
Yeah.
Greg, thanks for doing this with us.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. Sorry about the hiccup, but it was very nice to meet you and a great hang.
Yeah. Good hang. I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right,
Talk to you
brother.
soon.
Thank you, man.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Greg Fitzsimmons is my favorite comedian.
Yes. Great dude. Love to have one of my favorites from the old school.
You call me his friend, kinda.
Yeah, there you go. Making friends. Kinda. Sort of. Anyway, enjoy your groceries.
Don't be an asshole.
I know your mama's name.
Enjoy your cigarette. We had to look it up.